So we need to talk about a recent 9-0 unanimous ruling by the Supreme Court involving the Fourth Amendment's protections and when excessive force by law enforcement impacts that right. So let's talk about what is now happening in this critical case and what is the results. Now, before we jump into this video, I want to bring something to your guys' attention. We have something new available to you if you're interested. I know a lot of you guys have already signed up for the free legal guide that we made available for you guys, and the response to that has been amazing. And a lot of the comments were that you guys wanted more information, you wanted more in-depth dives into a lot of the content that we had in that legal guide. What we ended up doing is we created a legal method course that's now available to you guys. It's live today. You can find it in the links down below. It's something that I've developed and been using over the last 6 years, and I now want to make it available to you guys as well. This isn't insurance or anything like that. It's a system that keeps you protected before restrictions even drop, and it helps navigate you through these processes. It's a system that prevents good people from being blindsided by shifting laws, state traps, and changing ATF interpretations and regulations. And for the first time, I'm sharing the entire method with you guys. But here's the thing, enrollment is only open, until this Friday. It opens today, so you can start signing up today, but it's going to go all the way until midnight on Friday. So Friday, September 26th at midnight, this will close. After that, it'll close up. And the reason why I wanted to do that is essentially because I want to be able to pay attention to all of you who sign up, give you the attention that you need, and focus on those individuals that sign up for this course. If you want this legal advantage that works despite these new restrictions that come down, you can hit the link down below in the details section, also in the description, in the pinned comment, and you can do that right now to lock in your spot. And so thank you guys so much for everybody who supported the legal guide, for everybody who signed up for that. But if you want to go a step further, I highly recommend you check out the links down below. We have a lot for you guys, a lot more in-depth educational information on a lot of these topics, as well as templates and things like that you can get as well. Now, as I mentioned in the intro, in this video, we're going to be discussing a recent 9-0 unanimous ruling that was issued by the Supreme Court. This case involves the Fourth Amendment's protections against unreasonable searches and seizures, and when law enforcement activities through excessive force impact those rights. This new unanimous decision issued by the Supreme Court came in a case called Barnes versus Felix. This new lawsuit should be on everyone's minds because it involves how courts must now analyze situations like this one going forward. Although this case is not traditionally dealing with warrantless search and seizures or two-way topics, this Barnes case is directly addressing the seizure doctrine in some ways, and it deals with excessive force and how that impacts the Fourth Amendment. As gun owners, we have seen a lot of highly publicized situations where law enforcement officers interact with lawful gun owners, and through excessive force or huge mistakes, gun owners end up, getting shot, or something, happens where someone is fatally wounded. This analysis by the Supreme Court directly impacts those types of situations and involves your rights in those very scary situations. Now, the facts around this case are as follows. Essentially, the individual here, Roberto Felix Jr., is a law enforcement officer, and he pulled over the individual, the plaintiff in this case, Ashton Barnes, for suspected toll violations. And he pulled him over because I believe cameras identified that he had toll violations through his license plate, so he pulled him over because of those toll violations. Felix ordered Barnes, the individual, to exit the vehicle, and Barnes decided to open his door, and then he acted like he was going to exit the car, but then he attempted to drive away. Now, reacting in a split second, Officer Felix decided to jump onto the floorboard of the open door. It was open, so he jumped on the floorboard as the car was driving away. He then responded again in a split second by deciding to fire 2 shots at Barnes as the car was driving away. Barnes was fatally hit, but he did manage to stop the car, and the total incident kind of happened over 5 seconds. Now, in response to this, Barnes' mother and father sued Officer Felix because of this incident, alleging that Officer Felix violated Barnes' Fourth Amendment right against excessive force. Now, on review, the district court granted summary judgment in favor of the police officer, applying the Fifth Circuit's moment of threat rule. The Court of Appeals affirmed, explaining that the moment of threat rule requires asking only whether an officer was in danger at the moment of the threat that resulted in his use of deadly force. Under that rule, events leading up to the shooting are not relevant and cannot be considered. They claim that here the precise moment of threat was the 2 seconds when Officer Felix was clinging to the moving car as Barnes was attempting to escape and drive away the vehicle. They stated because Officer Felix could then have reasonably believed that his life was in danger at that moment, the Fifth Circuit panel held that the shooting was lawful. This case eventually made its way all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, And the question the Supreme Court answered in this case is whether courts should apply the moment of threat doctrine or something else when evaluating these types of Fourth Amendment claims. On review, the unanimous Supreme Court held that a claim that a law enforcement officer used excessive force during a stop or arrest is analyzed under the Fourth Amendment, which requires that the force deployed be objectively reasonable from the perspective of a reasonable officer at the scene. The inquiry into the reasonableness of the police force requires analyzing the totality of the circumstances. That analysis demands careful attention to the facts and circumstances relating to the incident. So in this case, the Supreme Court rejected the more limited moment of threat analysis and instead applied a totality of the circumstances approach and looked at the reasonableness of the officer. They stated that most notably here, the totality of the circumstances inquiry has no time limit. While the situation at the precise time of the shooting will often matter the most, earlier facts and circumstances may bear on how a reasonable officer would have understood and responded to later ones. Prior events may show why a reasonable officer would perceive otherwise ambiguous conduct as threatening or instead as innocuous. They went on to state that the moment of threat rule applied below prevents that sort of attention to context and thus conflicts with this court's instruction to analyze the totality of the circumstances. By limiting their view to the 2 seconds before the shooting, the lower courts could not take into account anything preceding that final moment. So, for example, they could not consider the reasons for the stop or the earlier interactions between the suspect and the officer. And because of that limit, they could not address whether the final 2 seconds of the encounter would look different if set within a longer time frame. They state a court deciding a use of force case cannot review the totality of the circumstances if it puts on chronological blinders. They concluded by pointing out that the court does not address a separate question about whether or how an officer's own creation of a dangerous situation factors into the whole reasonableness analysis. Instead, they're going to leave that to the lower court to consider in this case. So the main thrust of this ruling was rejecting the more limited scope of analysis that was applied by the moment of threat rule by the lower court, by the Fifth Circuit as well. Instead, the Supreme Court ordered that lower courts need to look at the totality of the circumstances before and during the incident to get a more comprehensive picture of whether the Fourth Amendment is violated and whether or not the police officer's actions or a shooting is justified in those situations. During the oral arguments, the Supreme Court was also very concerned about situations like police officers failing to identify themselves or someone exercising their Second Amendment rights and their right to self-defense if police officers engage in this type of conduct or don't identify themselves or engage in raids. They were concerned about those type of situations, but they did limit the review in this case specifically to whether or not this was justified and how the analysis needs to play out in the lower court. So in essence, the Supreme Court found that courts must look beyond just the moment of the threat and instead look at the totality of the situation. The Supreme Court, because of this, issued an order and they mandated this case be sent back down to the lower courts for a re-review and a new analysis in light of what they just said to look at the totality of the circumstances instead of just the more limited moment of threat. This does not mean that the Fifth Circuit or the District Court will find that the officer here, acted incorrectly, but they will need to look at the relevant information before and during the incident to make that type of determination. They can't just look at the 2 seconds where he was on the vehicle and if he was in fear for his life. Now, this case is important because it impacts everyone's Fourth Amendment protections against excessive force. For gun owners, this is very important because especially in light of all the high-profile situations where we're seeing this pop up where lawful gun owners are potentially shot by police officers or they're having, interactions where, the ATF or the federal government or state law enforcement is trying to enforce these gun control laws. And then, we have a bad situation play out where a lawful gun owner is ending up getting shot because of these interactions. If law enforcement overreacts or misjudges a lawful gun owner as doing something wrong, the totality of the circumstances test now gives courts more leeway to rule in favor of the citizen and prevent these types of situations. So this is good news because it helps protect everybody and reinforces the Fourth Amendment rights. Now, like I mentioned, you've been hearing about the situation, about this horrible police interaction and the consequences of something like this, but this is not an isolated incident. There are a lot of situations where gun control laws or state laws or federal regulations and a lot of situations get people jammed up. Again, I want to mention that we now have the legal body armor course, available for you guys. It's live, like I mentioned in the intro. You can find that link down below. For you guys that signed up for the free legal guide, you guys saw the value that we added to you guys for free. You could see, that information that was available to you guys. I know a lot of you guys, said it was very useful. You printed that out and you're having that, kind of in your documents to protect yourself. In the course, we go way more in depth with a lot of those topics and a lot of other 2A topics to give you guys as much education and information as I possibly could. Again, if you're interested in that, you can check that out using the link down below. That will be in the details section and also in the pinned comment. I hope you guys find value in that. And again, I want to mention it's only available for a limited time. It's available today. It started today, and it's going to go until midnight on Friday. And then after that, we're going to close it because I want to, be able to pay attention to everybody that signs up for the course and give you guys as much value as I can. So again, if you're interested, check that out using the links down below. If you have any questions about this case, make sure you comment down below and I will try to answer to those to the best of my ability. But as always, thank you guys so much for all of your support. And never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.